Welcome, everyone, to another session of Ask Me Anything, part of our public series, where we cover topics from recent news or from case management. And this week, we are covering Who Owns This? What we're going to talk about is who owns and runs the military child care programs. This is a hot topic right now, and that's because recently the EO that came out that discussed freezing federal grants and loans, and there was a bit of a frenzy over what this meant for the military fee assistance program. It highlighted a key issue that we're seeing in our community and in our case management. We frequently see the families just do not know who is responsible for these programs, which is vital for so many reasons that we're really going to get into here today. And we are very fortunate today to be joined by Tara Brandt. I met her a few years ago on the conference circuit, and every time we run into each other, I am just incredibly impressed by her knowledge base and how she truly understands the dynamics of these various funding structures. So much so that if someone were to ask me a question about anything, installation, childcare funding based, I could confidently walk away knowing that Tara would be standing there and be able to answer that. And so, Tara, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know that in true military spouse style, you're a bit on the run today. Please tell us a little bit about your knowledge in this space.
Kayla, thank you so much for having me on today. Good afternoon to everybody that is on or watching this later. Thank you for taking the time to really listen to what's going on. So this is a topic that I've had an opportunity to really dive into the past 3 years. I've had the privilege to work at the golf course as a supervisor on the installation that we are currently serving at. And so in this position, I've been able to see a more in-depth look as to how the installation is funding, running all activities, including childcare. So beyond the DoD funding and what the manning documents look like. This has been an eye-opening experience because I sit in NAF council meetings and I see all the financials on how a base allocates its money. And this is a very interesting topic, and it's exciting to be able to bring this to light to everyone and let them know where this funding just comes from.
Thank you. Yes. So today, as we are digging in, we're going to kind of cover these two different categories. I'm going to focus in on the left side, so a different funding stream through operations and maintenance budget, primarily the military fee assistance program and CCYH. And we are fortunate to have Tara here to discuss the other side, the CDC FCC side, the installation-based care. This is really a very simple graphic to break down, again, very high level view of how the funding is allocated to these programs that we're discussing today. What I want you to note at this level regarding military fee assistance programs, so here on this left side here, is that these are appropriated funds. This is worked out in the budget through NDAA. It is then appropriated. It moves to the operations and maintenance budget and then out to the branches to utilize. This is set aside funding. And so unless all of operations and maintenance disappears, in which case it would be way more than childcare that is getting impacted, we are not going to see this impacted by any type of federal loans or freezes. So Tara, from a funding only standpoint on how it gets to the installations, do you want to talk on that?
Yeah. Kayla, thank you. This is such a great question. This is more complex than most realize. So first, let's start with the Cat B funding side of it. So Cat B comes from your NAF, your non-appropriated funds facilities. So to break that down for ease, places like your bowling alley, your golf course, your event centers, your clubs, et cetera, they are on base and they're all Cat B. This means they need to run like a real business, as they do not get congressional funding to keep their doors open. Now, the money they make at the end of the year goes into a big pot of money called the MRF, as they call it, but that's morale, welfare, recreation funding. However, there's a little plot twist on this, is that AAFES, the Army and Air Force installations, AFES, gives a percentage back to the bases at the end of the year. Now, I tried to delve in to find out what that percentage is, and I wasn't able to get that, but I have seen that they do give back. Now, that also goes into the MRF, that the big pot of money. So when we talk MWR, that's the MRF that we're talking about, and then the Cap B funding. All of that trickles down into funding childcare centers and the childcare development and family childcare, the family childcare centers. So your CDC and your FCC. So now that we have an idea on the two funding types and how they're made up, now we can talk a little bit more about how that money is used. Kayla, do you want to talk more on the left side, or do we want to go and talk in on how this money is used?
No, let's go into how this money is used, because I'm going to dig into mine in a minute. So let me get the next slide up so you can kind of dig into that.
Okay.
Here you go.
So now that you understand the NAF and is where it comes from, so non-appropriated funds money, and it goes into the MRF, and it helps pay the budget that falls outside what the costs are. So in that left box, we're talking about parent fees. So parent fees are dictated by the DOD. So the fee policy comes out every school year. And what parents pay are in categories. So which is based on your household income. And you're going to say, well, how is this funding all included in this? So let's talk about the fee charts and the caps and the parent fees and all of this stuff. But the fee chart has 3 columns in it. The first column is what is suggested per week per category, and the other 2 are the low side and the high side. So you're saying, okay, so how does the money pay for this? So the child care centers are run by certain manning documents, and those manning documents require certain levels of people to be employed at those centers. The ones that are on the manning documents are APF funds. So those are appropriated funds that pay for that. Then the money that they receive for childcare are the NAF employees. So those are going to be your flex employees that fill in the childcare centers. So if you have a bunch of lower enlisted people on base utilizing childcare, there is a smaller amount of money that's coming in to pay for the NAF employees. So then we have this whole impact of what it costs to run the childcare. So then we've got the installation influence, and how does the installation influence the cost of childcare? And that goes by where they see they are, and they get to make that decision. Remember, we've got 3 columns on this this paper that comes out from DOD, and they can either choose the low side to charge or the high side, or they can stay with the DOD suggested. So the installation influences what exactly price per week they're going to charge based on the type of military members that are attached to their installation. Does that,
So
do you understand what I'm saying there, Kayla?
yeah, so you're saying that, so we know it's a combination of NAF and appropriated funding. And then of course some comes in then through MRF as well. But if you have an installation where most of the attendees at the CDC are junior enlisted, so they would have lower costs for their care, you're saying they would need to adjust for that. The installation influence would need to adjust for that.
Correct. And so that is where the AFES money that has been coming into that big MRF helps offset. So currently at the installation I'm at, they continuously run in the red for the cost in order to stay open. Even though they're getting money from Congress, they still have to have so many people per classroom, because they still have to follow the DOD guidelines for childcare. So the cost of staffing the childcare centers is a huge influence as to where this money is coming from and how they're deciding to charge weekly.
Okay, and that was something that I learned from Tara recently. I didn't realize that there was additional funding to these MRF funds. My knowledge on the installation really stopped that funding wise at, we have the combination of appropriated and the NAF, and that's really where I was limited. So I think it's really interesting to now be able to add this into that knowledge bank of, sometimes it seems like frequently at some locations there's a borrowing from that pool of money in order to support this. Would that shift? Do you think that would shift because here, let me just jump back real quick. It is currently listed under Cat B. Do you think that there would need to be less utilization of this additional funding if this was shifted to Cat A? Because wouldn't that then be all appropriated, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's interesting. It's something to think about moving forward. I think I've heard some discussions around whether this could be switched to Cat A, but I don't have anything definitive on that. Do you have any insight into that or not at this time?
I don't have anything definitive on it at this time,
Yeah.
but I've also heard the same that you have heard, that
Yeah.
they've talked about it.
Okay. Well, I mean, maybe, and of course, as always, if we get updated information, because this is available afterwards, we drop it in underneath of these conversations so families can really track, how these things shift. So on the fee assistance side, and I will talk on this really briefly because I talked about it a little bit on the last one. For MCCYN, so that's your military fee assistance program, we already discussed these first two bullets. It starts at the NDAA, it's approved, goes through appropriations, sent into the operations and maintenance budget, and then gets broken out into service levels. So that's your funding levels here. It is at this point that we tend to see a little confusion in our case management. So Navy and Coast Guard do not utilize what is called a third-party administrator. So TPA. Their programs are managed by the Navy. So down here. This means that they will internally do those administrative things. So they will process family paperwork, center paperwork, they process payments. And any issues that arise, including the need for exceptions to policy, will go directly through themselves. All of the other branches utilize a third-party administrator, again, TPA here, which is currently Child Care Aware of America for these branches. It's a contract, so that could change. This means each branch pays Child Care Aware of America. It is not a grant. It is not a loan. It is a payment through a contract that they do these administrative tasks that the Navy has taken in for themselves as well as the Coast Guard. This created a lot of uncertainty when Child Care Aware of America was, of course, talking about what that funding freeze meant for them and for families across the nation. I want to be very clear here. They are paid by the branches to administer the program. So while a freeze will likely impact Child Care Aware of America, because they do a lot of nationwide work, they are leaders in a lot of spaces, and they get a good bit of grants from federal, state governments. It does not impact MCCYN. And we see the names, especially in these branches, used interchangeably. Even centers, we see centers list on their website that they are participating in the Child Care Aware program. It is a military fee assistance program. It is created by the military. The military is responsible for it. That is why it's called military child care in your neighborhood. And this issue with that language has continued for years. And part of this Ask Me Anything is I encourage the audience, I encourage everyone out there as they're having these conversations, as they're seeing people post in groups about this, about Child Care Aware of America, about MCCYN, to please use the right language because it's important for times like this. So here on the next slide, what we'll see here is why it's important. So Child Care Aware of America is, again, a TPA, which means they cannot approve your exceptions to policy. So if you do need some exception, so for example, say you cannot find any available nationally accredited care near you, and you are going to need local, state quality rated care instead. So they're not listed as participating. You will need an exception to policy to utilize that. And Child Care Aware cannot approve that. because it is not within their scope. They're an administrator. They are the middleman, for lack of a better phrase, in this program. And anything that may come down to impact Child Care Aware of America, really hoping that we don't see any more federal freezes. But if one does occur, this program is safe. MCCYN is safe because it is completely appropriated, budgeted, built into the operations and maintenance budget. The other reason that I want us to focus in on using correct language, so saying MCCYN or Military Fee Assistance Program, and also the reason for 80% of our case management right now, is that incorrect language leads families to reach out to the wrong people when they get stuck or they need help. Every branch has a program administrator for MCCYN and MCCYN Plus. So we will go over those here shortly. I just could not drive this home enough that we have to start using the right language when we're referencing these programs, and it's very important. And I use this little story sometimes to kind of explain why we see families running into the wrong place. And I say it's like ordering a chair online. You bought it from a store, you ordered it online. It gets taken to UPS and you have to go pick it up. You get there, say it's the wrong chair. You wouldn't ask UPS to fix your chair. You wouldn't say, UPS, give me the right chair, because UPS doesn't own that chair store. They are the middle person. They transported it to you. If it's a broken chair, maybe UPS, but most of the time you have to go to where the origin is. And for MCCYN, the origin is the Department of Defense. It is your service branch. Families who have limited bandwidth do not have the space to fight the wrong people when they're having issues. And so we want to be sure that you guys are getting to the right contacts, which we will go through here in a few minutes. I'll have those available for you. So now, Tara, can you talk a little bit about, now that we've done funding, let's talk about running. Like what are the nuances here?
So when we're talking about CDC and FCC and like the updates that are happening currently, if there's more of an immediate need for discounted or free care, you're going to need an ETP for that. And so what does that look like, right? So what's your exception to policy? And this usually starts with your CDC coordinator or your FCC coordinator. And in my experience in speaking with these people on the installation that we're currently on, they work very hard to try and move that in the right direction, whatever that means. So that gets routed, in my case, to a mission support group commander for approval. Can it go beyond that? Can it go to the wing or the base commander? Absolutely. But at this point, the mission support group commander is really who's deciding this. And that's for the CDC side of it. That's the mission support group. And the FCC coordinators, they're on base. They're utilizing information from CDC coordinators all the way up to the mission support group commander to get their support in deciding these ETPs. And obviously you can request ETPs for like a change of life situation, or a situation that you have at home that you are not allowed to currently work because something has happened, like a medical situation's happened of some kind. And what I'm hearing is they're working hard to support that, at least on our installation. Now, I've heard of other installations pushing against that, the ETPs, and they're just saying they can't support it. But currently what I'm hearing is we're supporting as much as we can. So, everybody's got something different happening in their life. And at some point you're going to need an ETP. So who do I go to? Right. And I always start with your coordinator. If you're not getting a result from your coordinator, then you're moving to the proper commander that runs that on your installation. And that the other thing is, that's why Kayla and the Operation Child Care Project is so important and vital to our military families. Because if you're not getting that ETP run up the right flagpole, if you will, that's where Kayla and her team are able to step in. And that's why it's so vital to know what your resources are. You don't stop because you get a no. You don't stop until Kayla and her team help you get to where you need to be, help to get you to that yes. And then as we were talking about shortening and lengthening the CDC hours, as I spoke about in the previous slide, we're talking about manning documents and how the manning document is put together and the APF position. So managers and trainers are appropriated funds. So that's NDAA money, as we talked about before. That's where appropriated funds come from. Also, each classroom, no matter the size, must have to have one technician, and those are APF funded. So now again, we're talking back at money again. And you're going to ask, how does that fall into shortening and lengthening of CDC? Well, the classroom has to follow the DoD staffing, and this is where the flex employees come in, right? So again, you're asking, how is that shortening and lengthening the hours? So as the mission is driven on the installation you're in, the commanders sit in a council meeting and have to decide, how can we support this mission as it's changing and what that looks like. So currently in the installation we're in, we just brought in the F-22 school, right? So now we've added a whole different complexity to our existing base. So how do we do that? Because now we've got night flying, we've got day flying, and we've always had shift work on our base, but now we've got more of an influx of people with their families. So this comes at a council meeting that they all sit on, the installation commanders sit on, and decide, how do we make this work? How many more people do we need to hire? Where is this money coming from? How can we continue to move forward and support our families? And this is where some big decisions are made. Are we going to try and add more FCC centers outside the base so that we can continue to support the mission that we just took? So shortening and lengthening hours it's important to understand that those decisions are not come by lightly. Those are big decisions and they're impact decisions every single day. But if they cannot follow the DoD guidelines to fulfill the right people in the classrooms, then they're not providing quality care and legal care. So you want that. You want them following DoD guidelines. That's important. And that's for the protection of your children and everybody within the facility. So the violations, based on what I've been told and how this all works, they're trying to be transparent on the installation I'm in. And it's my understanding not every installation is being transparent, but this is a right that you have to ask for violations. It's a right that you have. So do you stop at no? Again, this is where you don't stop at no. And if you are not able to speak with the coordinators and get what you need, this is where Kayla comes in again. And Kayla helps you get to the yes, whatever that yes is. It's important to know that none of these decisions that are made on base at an installation level are made willy-nilly. They are definitely made to try and do the best they can while following DoD guidelines. And I think it's so important for families to understand they're not out to not give childcare. They're trying to give childcare. But there's so many guidelines that have to be followed in order to do that. And the funding has to be there as well.
Yeah. And to that point, Tara, I think it's important because we know every installation is different, right? So I think it's important to note that frequently we have a lot of different installations just operating off the information that they have available to them at that time. So sometimes the decisions they're making, I know I hear from a lot of you in communities when there are big decisions being made, you're saying, well, that's not what we needed, or that's not going to fill this need, or now what about XYZ? Sometimes they don't have that information. And I know that it feels like they should have all the information of what's happening with every family for the entire installation. But they are, after all, humans. And it's hard to be cognizant of everything all the time. And I think this is why it's really important to raise your voice when there are situations, so that that can be taken into consideration. Or maybe they'll come back and say, we did look at that. And then when it came down to, the two things we had to choose between, that's where we were. But I don't want anyone assuming that these decisions are always being made with everyone in mind in all of the information on the ground, because military life is nuanced. Families situations differ from family to family. I know that when there was shortening of CDC hours, that it impacted a lot of families. Well, it impacted about 5 to 10 families, which doesn't feel like it's a lot, except those families didn't have an alternative they could roll over to. That is kind of that nuance area of, let's make sure that your voices are being heard when these things are impacting you, so that this is data capture. This is something that they will then have moving forward when they do have to make these really tough decisions. So I appreciate you breaking all of that down for us. I am violation results, child safety. These are the primary things that we will be focusing in on in this next year. Yes, Tara, everything she's told me about her installation, they are working so hard to be as transparent as humanly possible with families, but the nation is big. There are many installations. And so we really want to keep seeing those high levels of accountability and transparency when it comes to the safety of children that are in these areas. On the military fee assistance side, when we get to approving exceptions to policy, those are going to come through your branch contacts. And I'm going to give you those here in a couple slides. And of course, they'll be published as well. Exceptions to policy may be things like utilizing MCCYN Plus. That is an exception to policy program. It's not advertised as that, but it is an exception to policy program. So you have to accept nationally accredited care first. And then if that isn't available, then you can ask for enrollment into MCCYN Plus. And so that would go through your program branch heads. If you are stuck in the fee assistance process, you're going to need your contact for your program specifically. For years, what we heard on OCCP side is that, families aren't having access issues. Everything is smooth. Everyone's happy. And then after some time in collecting this information, we know that's not entirely accurate. We know that there are families who are struggling, but they're not likely to be data captured to where informed decisions can be made on the DoD side. So if you are, for example, using a branch that has a TPA, you can send it through. So you could send it through, if you're using Child Care Aware of America, you could send it through Child Care Aware of America if you're stuck or you need an exception to policy, but they are just going to push that up to the program because that is, again, not within their wheelhouse there. That could lengthen the time that you are waiting, and not all families can afford to wait for this to go through. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you need to be quick and in a hurry, or you're really struggling submitting the same documents over and over again, this is where you engage your program administrator every single time. And then, as Tara mentioned before, if you don't know who that is, or if you are stuck at that level, you can always reach out to our case management. This is what we're here for, is to really take that administrative burden off of your back and help you find those contacts. And then if you're still not getting progress there, you're not getting answers there, we will continue helping you find those contacts and escalating until we get to where we got to be. And then, Tara, you go ahead on this one. I did link these in for everyone from Military OneSource.
Oh, thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. This doesn't necessarily give you the person at your installation, but these links are extremely important. Please click on them, go to them. And if you're having problems successfully getting in contact with them, again, you should be able to go to your installation level and talk to this person, but you always start in the child care center. If you can't get a hold of somebody, they can route it to the coordinator. But if you still are getting roadblocks here, this is Kayla and her case management team. This is what they're doing. Just like Kayla was saying in the previous slide, we want you to get to yes, whatever that yes is for your childcare, so that you can continue to serve, so you can continue to work, so you can continue to go to doctor's appointments if you need it. we know how important childcare is and how stressful it can be, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that that becomes less of a stress point for you, so that things move more smoothly in your life.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Tara's right. We don't have names. We don't have names. But these links, thankfully, and then her explaining, the difference between those CDC, FCC will get you hopefully to the right person. Always free to escalate with us on the MCCYN and the CCYH side. These are going to be your program branch contacts. These should not be your first step in the process. So if you haven't even gone to militarychildcare.com and applied for care yet, I don't recommend jumping right here. I recommend starting with the process with militarychildcare.com, putting your name in, getting started. And then this is really for when you get stuck. So if you need an exception policy, there's an extenuating circumstance, whatever it might be, that's when you jump over to who your respective program contact is. And then you'll see there's two of them here, specifically Space Force. You're also going to want to copy in your Air Force. And then with Coast Guard, you're also going to want to copy in your Navy. And that's just kind of how those programs work. And these will all be available afterwards. As always, we've said it about 80 times here, but I really want to push this in. If you get stuck, you don't need to navigate this on your own. That is our intention here, is no one is ever on their own in this process. If I don't have the information that you need, I have clearly we have Tara here. I have a lot of really smart people who have a lot of connections. And so we really do find our way there to who you need. So under our questions and final thoughts, I have one question that had come in from our case management. Tara, I wanted to see first, did you hear any questions as you were advertising this or talking about it?
So I'm hearing probably the biggest question of all is, we have people that want to become childcare providers, and they're not understanding the process on how to get it done. And they're at home providers. So Kayla, you want to talk a little bit about how FCC works and what that means, because anybody watching has the potential to become a childcare provider.
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially because we do have such a transient kind of population here. So the way it works, and some installations are doing this in a slightly different, faster way. Historically, you would go through your installation CYS to apply. That FCCs are not something that gets published. You wouldn't find that on USA Jobs, because it is you having your own business. You end up contracting with the installation. So what happens is the installation is the one who will go through, accredit you, license you, inspect you. They will handle any violation reports, complaints. They are responsible for helping you with training, with supports that you need to run your center, with your onboarding. In some states, there used to also be a state license requirement if you were off the installation. We are seeing that disappear. So at least 17 states have dropped it. I know there's a couple that are looking to drop it, and that's something we're following very closely for a number of reasons. So you used to also have to be licensed by the state. That's just no longer the case in a lot of these states. I know in Virginia, where Tara is, that is currently the rule there. So if you do want to operate your own FCC, if you do want to be a care provider, that is something that you can go through your installation for. Some places have really expedited that and what it looks like. We used to see these hangups of people saying they were waiting months to get their background checks done. And we're now seeing some installations have really shortened that up to where it's just a couple of weeks. They hold these hiring fairs where they get everything that burdensome kind of red tape done all at once. And so it's a much smoother transition in. And then you are your own company. So you are your own business. And most installations do let you choose your hours, but you still do need to follow the priority placement of children. So if there is a family looking for an FCC that is a higher priority level, so say they're a single service member or dual military, they do get priority in your home over, say, someone who has a service member with a spouse who is still looking for work. They do still follow that priority placement. Do you think that Tara, do you feel like that covers kind of that gambit?
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think it's important for people to know that they can get licensed through the installation, but they still follow those guidelines, even though they own their own business and they run their own business. They still have to follow the guidelines for the installation.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so on my side, we had a question come through, and Tara touched on this a little bit on how that works, FCC, CDC wise, is EFMP adults. So who do they contact if you're an EFMP adult? So say you're a military spouse who is EFMP, you have a young child who needs care, and your spouse is a service member. You don't technically qualify then under any of the priority categories for MCCYN or CCYH. In those situations, you will have to get an exception to policy. And due to the nature of that, I do recommend that you do start at your program branch for that. And I heavily, for MCCYN and CCYH, you start at that program branch contact rather than going through, maybe if there is a third party administrator, you start at that level, because that is going to require a couple of exceptions to policy. If you're uncomfortable navigating what that looks like, or you're not sure how to ask for that exception to policy, you can always come into our case management. We're happy to help you navigate that piece, because we do know that is unfortunately, it's a category that is just not on the priority placement. It's not something that has been included, but we are seeing that more and more where, spouses need medical care, or because of a condition, sometimes temporary, sometimes long-term, they cannot be the primary caretaker for their child. And so, how do we navigate that is really what we're looking at. Tara, do you have any insight on installation wise, if there is an EFMP adult, how do they navigate that if they need FCC or CDC?
So, like I had touched on it prior, when I spoke with the CDC coordinator, that all is obviously base level or installation level. And I know, like I said, the installation, we're working hard to make sure everybody gets childcare one way or the other. But it's not an easy system, and we know that. We're aware of that. We're not trying to make this sound like it's super easy. It is a little bit harder to get an ETP, but they're trying to approve every ETP that they can on our installation because of the need. And again, I know, and I've heard it from many people, that's not the case. And so, anybody who's watching or listening to this later is saying, yeah, all sounds warm and fuzzy, but you got to start somewhere, and you got to start with the ETP, and you got to start with your coordinators and just keep working that. It's so important not to give up, and it's easy to give up when you're so frustrated, but you can't give up. Let Kayla and her team help you to yes.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tara, because that is something that a lot of times I'll move into our last slide here, is a lot of times we do hear from families, it became too much and they quit. And I want to note that's valid. That's fair. Sometimes it is just too much for you to navigate on your own. And in no way Tara and I try to minimize that as we go through these. We're very aware that it's not always as simple as, what we have laid out in these slides. And everyone's bandwidth is very different. And so asking for help is the fastest way that you're going to get to yes. So ask for help when you need it. OCCP is here not to replace anything that currently exists in the DoD. We're very much here just to supplement and to help people navigate some of these barriers that can be really difficult when you don't get to stay in the same place your whole life, and you have to relearn it whenever you move. Okay, so we're at our thank you. I want to say, as always, I know most of you do not watch this live. You watch it after the fact. You can always drop questions into the chat boxes under these if you do find them on our Facebook or our YouTube, and we will respond there. Thank you so much, Tara, for joining us and giving us so much knowledge here. This presentation is going to be available in the education section of our website. The video is going to be available on Facebook, YouTube, And I'm also going to be dropping in links to some things that Tara referenced and some things that I referenced to make sure that everyone has everything in one place. So if you do have questions after this, FCC, CDC related, Tara will give it her first go and see if she can find that information. If not, then yes, we will absolutely step in for that. And then everything MCCYN side, we're happy to take on. So thank you again, Tara, for joining us. And thank you everyone who jumped in to watch it with us today.
Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you.